Hola, banditos, and welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I am Mike Farah, and you're not seeing things. Joe and Oren are not here. That is because they are recovering from all their Terrificon adventures. But fear not, we have another great episode for you today, whether they are here or whether I am just doing it myself, which I am. 2 days or 2 episodes in a row. I hope you like it. Anyway, before we get to the guest, we want to thank our sponsor, TwoMorrows Publishing. That is TwoMorrows.com is where you can find all their fine publications. Please subscribe. Please buy some of their new books. They really put out a great product, regardless of whether it's a magazine or book. TwoMorrows.com. Okay. So let's get to our guest for this week. It is a returning guest. His name is J.M. DeMatteis. I'm sure you know that name. He is a writer. He's been on this program before. But we are interviewing him today particularly because Magneto #1, his miniseries that he is doing with Todd Nauck, is coming out today. That's right. Today you can buy it. So we get into everything Magneto, everything villains. You know, this is a series, one of those retro series that's about a previous period in the X-Men's life when Magneto is the headmaster of the school. And we talk about all that great stuff and also get into his DeMultiverse as well, which is his independent project that he's funded through Kickstarter. The first #1s from 4 different series came out earlier, and he's going to be doing another round, and hopefully another round and another round, and these continue on into the future. So enough with the prologue. Let's get to it. This is J.M. DeMatteis. J.M., how are you?
I am fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing great. So it was announced a while ago, and you were leading up to it, that you have a new Magneto series coming out, miniseries, on August 2nd with art by Todd Nauck. And we wanted to ask about that and give you a chance to talk a little bit about X-Men and all things Magneto. So let's jump into it. And correct me if I'm wrong, you have a humongous bibliography.
I do.
But not, it seems, a ton, or relatively a ton, of X books. But what attracted
not
you?
much at all. Not much at all. I had a short run on X Factor. What attracted me to this one? Well, there's 2 things. One is, when I was a kid and first got into Marvel, I was a huge fan of the original X-Men. Those early X-Men, you know, Lee and Kirby and Roy Thomas and Werner Roth, that whole period. That was like my special favorite. You know, everybody loved Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. You know, you had to love those because they were so amazing. But then you found that other book that kind of meant something to you that maybe not everybody else was into. And in those days, the X-Men really were not that popular. As we know, they got canceled a few years later. But it was something about that book really resonated with me, and I really loved those early X-Men stories. Even if you look back, some of the early stories maybe don't even make sense, but I loved them as a kid. I said somewhere that the first back issue I ever bought when I was like in the 8th grade, I think, was X-Men #1, which cost me $3 at the time. I no longer own it, unfortunately, because that would have been a great investment. Maybe I got it in the 7th grade. And I think the next year I saw a pair of boots that I really wanted, and I sold the X-Men for $5 or whatever and bought myself a pair of boots, something that you would only do in junior high school, right? So I love those old stories. And then Magneto, to this day, I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's okay. I think there's no more. I really like multifaceted characters with many layers and levels and conflicts and duality and all those things. I don't know if there's any more conflicted character in the entire Marvel universe if you look at the history of this character. So when they called me up and said, you know, do you want to do this? Get a chance to really dig in and explore all those contradictions, you know, I had to say yes.
The X community, or the X-Men books, always seemed a bit sort of removed from the Marvel universe proper. Did you get that impression when you were working on previous X-Men books, and especially this one?
Well, as the X-Men universe evolved, yeah, it almost became its own universe because there are so many characters, so many interactions, so many relationships that for me, I admire the hell out of what Chris Claremont did, that he took basically this half-dead franchise. Well, let's give a lot of credit to Len Wein and Dave Cockrum for reviving it in the first place. But then Claremont came along and turned it into this thing. Those new X-Men could have just as easily disappeared in a year. And he turned it into this franchise that's still going today. But for me as a writer, I'm someone who really likes to keep things simple, clear, straightforward. So whenever I look at the X universe, it'd be like, oh my God, I can't wrap my head around what's going on here. I can appreciate the art and the craft of it, but just in terms of, Chris has this innate ability to juggle 10,000 things like that. And I'm more of like, look at Kraven's Last Hunt. It's basically about 3 or 4 characters for 6 issues. I want to take the small group of characters and dive in deep. Even when Keith and I were doing Justice League, it was really about individual characters interacting much more than the big epic thing going on. So, like when I wrote X Factor in the '90s, I had to really, really wrestle with that, So now I've forgotten what the actual question was.
That's okay. We're talking about the sort of complexities.
Yeah,
of
the complexity. It's very complex. It's very complex, and I think you need a certain skill set to step into that, I think over the years, my ability to do that kind of juggling has improved. But even with this Magneto series, it's really, you have the New Mutants there and they're important to the story, but there's not like 10,000 other people there. And it's really focused primarily on him and on this new villain that we've introduced. And there, the New Mutants are sort of the foundation that it's built on, but then you have Magneto and Ire, who is the new villain. And it's a lot of it is really focused on them. And it's really, really a very deep interior dive into his psyche and his character. I always say when I'm looking for ways into characters, it's about kind of peeling off the top of their heads and getting a flashlight, rooting around in there to see, I don't know if we've ever looked in that corner or that corner. And this series has really allowed me to do that. And so there's two things going on. One is like the 12-year-old me who loved the X-Men back then, who's like so thrilled to have an opportunity to work with this character. And there's a lot of flashbacks to those early X-Men stories, because one of the things that fascinated me was if you look at Magneto when he first shows up, there's no nuance to that character. There's no second level, third level. He's just a bad guy. He might as well have a mustache and be twirling it like a silent movie villain, It's just like, I'm going to destroy you all, And then, of course, as he was developed, especially by Chris over the years, this is a very, very complex, nuanced character. So how do you explain this guy over here from 1964 or whatever it was? With this guy that we know now. So we go back to some of those incidents through the lens of the more complex Magneto to see what was really going on inside him while he was presenting an image to the world that was just this one-dimensional mustache twirling villain. And by doing that, we also get to see the original X-Men, which was like such a kick for me. I got to sit down and reread all those early X-Men stories. And so I got to be 12 years old again. And that, of course, is the fun of this business. We're trying to write deeper, more sophisticated stories, but we're all 12-year-olds at heart. So you get to please both those sides of you. And this series has really done that for me.
That's an interesting point. I often find myself kind of at odds with myself in trying to look at more, mature material and things that are pushing the boundaries in terms of the art form with those that just want sort of the thrills and fun of the comic book form, And I
think in superhero comics, you can have both. You should have both, and it's certainly as creators and fans, we are all very much in touch with our inner 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds, And I think if you ever lose that, especially when you're dealing with, the Marvel and DC superhero universes, then you shouldn't even be there. Because you have to have both. That's where the sense of innocence and the sense of wonder about these characters and these stories come from. And then you build on that, and you can build out in more and deeper and more sophisticated ways. But you need that foundation of that sense of wonder and that innocence that we all had laying on the living room floor reading a comic book.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the time period. You already mentioned it. So this is a I'm not sure if there is an official designation for these type of series, but I'll call them retro series, right?
Right.
Which have been kind of popping up quite a bit.
Yeah,
And
I've done two of them with Spider-Man already. Yeah, yeah.
Right, exactly. And yes, Ben Reilly Spider-Man and
The Lost Hunt.
Raven's Lost Hunt. So what do you think the appeal is here about going back to these time periods instead of, setting something in the current continuity?
Well, obviously there is some sort of nostalgia value in that for people, or, say with Ben Reilly, there are a lot of people out there that really, really love Ben Reilly, and they love the Ben Reilly of the Clone Saga era, and so to go back into that period and tell a new story, we get to pinch that nerve, I guess is the way to call it. Yeah. But at the same time, I have to say, if all you're doing it for is a nostalgia kick, it's not worth doing. With all these series, in the end, it doesn't matter whether it's set in, quote, the 90s or the 80s or 5 years ago or 10 years from now. I just want to tell the best story I possibly can. So like this Magneto thing, I'm writing it. I'm not thinking about, oh, this is the 80s, other than I know what the status quo is. This is what the status quo was then. And it's an interesting point in time for him because he stepped into Xavier's shoes. He's taken over at the school. And in a lot of ways, this is completely antithetical to who he is. He's upholding the dream of the guy who's been his greatest enemy and in some ways his best friend for all these years. That's a whole other interesting relationship between the two of them. It's almost like Peter Parker and Harry Osborn when Harry was the Green Goblin. These guys love each other and hate each other at the same time. But so he's stepping into this and he doesn't know whether this is what he should be doing or if he's worthy of doing this or what is his relationship to these kids. So there's that to explore. And then there's this whole disconnect between who we think he was when he started and who he is at this point. So there's so many levels and layers to get into there. I can't say too much because I want people to read the stories and enjoy them, but that's the general thing of it. And I have to say, Todd's artwork, phenomenal, just phenomenal. He turned in the first issue and it was like, oh, this is really great. And he just finished the second issue. And it's like, I thought that was great. This is like 10 times better. And the first one was great, So I can't imagine what it's going to look like by issue 4. He's just like every page is better than the one before. It's really fantastic work he's doing.
Yeah, he is a fantastic comic book artist.
Yes.
It almost defines, to call him comic booky is a great compliment because that's what
I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it really works with these type of projects, and I'm glad to hear that. We can expect more of that in the series. In terms of the project itself, was this something that you came to Marvel to pitch? Did they have an idea?
They came to me. Okay. Yeah. I'd worked with the editor, Mark Basso, on a couple of other things, and he just called me up one day and said, hey, how do you feel about this? And then, because he knows that my thing is like, let's look at these villains and these characters and let's find all these levels and layers. And he just thought that would be up my alley. And it was, and I immediately said, that's a really cool idea. Let's do this. So yeah, it was as simple as that.
So this series, as you mentioned, takes place in the past when Magneto,
whoever he may be,
tomato, is leading the school in Xavier's absence. And so this just sort of automatically where he is in his life and in his character journey is sort of more human, more of a good guy, as you said. And this seems to be, I have to say, kind of a trend here going on also around cinematically as well as in comics, is this anti-hero or the villain as taking a hero's journey. Did you see this series sort of a piece with kind of what's going on in this sort of humanizing or heroizing villains?
I don't know about heroizing, and I'm not aware, like thinking about like a broader trend. I'm just really thinking about the characters and the stories. But I've always tried to do that when writing, quote, villains, because the villain, first of all, doesn't think he or she is a villain. They have very good motives for what they're doing, unless they're like, the Red Skull or Carnage or one of these guys who's just complete maniac, evil, whatever. But most of these characters are are multi-level complex human beings who are doing what they're doing for multi-level complex reasons. So that they could walk the path between, villain and hero. They're probably, even when they're quote being villains, they're heroes in their own minds, so it's not that big a stretch. But you still want, on one level, you still want your villains to be villains. If you don't want all the villains to end up being heroes, because then you have no villains. But the most interesting villains are the ones where you can step into their shoes and go, oh, I get a sense of why he or she is doing this. I understand their motivation. I don't agree with the way they're going about reaching their goals, but I understand where they're coming from, or I understand the trauma that created them, or whatever it may be. And that's what's always fascinated me about these characters. Writing Spider-Man, like, okay, let me look at Kraven and see, oh, well, what is it? What's going on in there? I've looked at the Vulture. Well, he's been this way, but why is he that way? That's fun to me, to really get into their heads and understand where they're coming from and why, and present them not just as quote villains, but as human beings.
I imagine there's a lot of fertile ground there, especially because when they are first presented, like you said with Magneto, they are just, caustic, just straight ahead villainous characters.
Right.
And if you're really going to, have these enduring characters, you need to obviously get to their motivations, and can't just be like, I hate the X-Men. Why? Charles Xavier, maybe.
Right.
So it seems like these villains definitely are ripe for having these type of backstories. I wanted to sort of connect this a little bit, and I was wondering if you've seen the trailer for the Kraven movie. Yeah,
I have. Yeah, I have.
So without prejudging the film at all, do you think this is an example of what you're talking about? So you have Kraven, right, who's traditionally a villain, but this is a film all about him. And again, not maybe heroizing, if that's even a word, but sort of delving into these characters. Yeah, it is now. Delving into sort of the character motivations of who will ultimately maybe become a villain.
Yeah, like you said, it's hard to judge from watching a trailer. I think really on some level, what it's really about is that Sony has the rights to Spider-Man, and they're trying desperately to build a universe that doesn't, that Marvel isn't touching, that they're building their own universe. So what they have are these villains, and they're trying to make them into something that they can just do, 3 Kraven movies or whatever. So, and again, I see people online going bananas about this or that, about the trailer, this is wrong, or this is whatever. It's a couple of minutes. How can you judge a movie? And the truth of the matter is, as someone who, I've done a bunch of these animated DC movies based on comics. Well, we did adaptations. We changed things to suit the form, So they're doing a Kraven movie where Kraven has to be the main character. They're going to change stuff. Would I rather it be exactly the Kraven that I have in my head that I wrote in Kraven's Last Hunt? Absolutely. But it's not going to be that. I don't know. Based on the trailer, it's hard to tell if any of that Kraven has survived in the translation, But that doesn't mean it won't necessarily be a good movie. It just won't be the movie we're expecting or perhaps want. But I always want to give the stuff a chance. And it's like, sometimes the 30-second pre-trailer comes out and people are judging the movie. Yeah. And you really can't, because sometimes you see a crappy trailer, turns out to be a great movie. Sometimes you see the greatest trailer you've ever seen, and it's an awful movie. So you just never know. You never know. So I can't prejudge it. The other thing is everyone's like, well, do you think this is going to lead to Kraven's Last Hunt? I don't know. Someone said to me a few years ago, and I forget which podcast I was on, and I always say, forgive me, whoever it was that I've forgotten. They thought the best way to do Kraven's Last Hunt would be with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst with an older, grown-up Spider-Man, because he is older, he's married in there, and let Sam Raimi do it and let it be a standalone in its own little universe. And I thought that's a really cool idea, but please do it before Tobey Maguire gets too old to do it, So, but I thought that what a really cool idea. Let Sam Raimi loose with that original cast on Kraven's Last Hunt would be a very cool thing.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And
yeah.
I will fess up that I do not think it was on our podcast. So I will give, tip of the hat to whoever it was that came up with the idea. But yeah, that storyline is, it's a more mature storyline. And
it's a more mature Spider-Man. He's a grown-up. He's married, Yep. So, Tom Holland is great, but, he still seems like a kid. Even after 3 movies, he seems like a kid. And you need to build up, you need him to be older and more experienced for that story to happen.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's why they wanted Tom Holland honestly, is that he still looks like a kid.
Right.
Because they wanted to keep him in sort of that younger age for quite a while.
Right.
So,
right.
But yeah. Okay. So here it is. The idea is back out there. Sony, please, get
the other
this
thing I always thought was if they want to do their thing with the live action movies, do what DC does, do an animated. Do a nice, straight to video animated movie. I'm happy to write it. In fact, I'd love to write it, let's be honest. And adapt the story that way. Because the other problem with the Craven story is a third of the movie, your hero is buried alive, right? So you're paying this guy $20 million, and I always joke, and it's a joke, but it's also true. Like you watch, say, the Raimi movies. In each movie, you see Tobey Maguire's face more and the mask less because you're paying this actor a lot of money and you want to see his face, So to say, and by the way, you're buried alive for a third of the movie, even though you're having hallucinations or whatever, it might be a hard one to pull off. But in an animated movie, you can do that.
You're absolutely right, and you bring up a good point. I don't know why Marvel does not have a type of animated movie arm the way DC does. Because
DC, my own stuff aside, DC has just done such great stuff in that arena. Great stuff, and
it's a great place
to
work out these ideas and these very hyper specific storylines. Because otherwise, you are sort of trying to retrofit it into what's gone on in the movie universe, and it never quite fits the right way. Okay, I wanted to take a turn because we were, I guess, one of the only podcasts that didn't get to interview you about the DeMultiverse, which is a phenomenally successful Kickstarter that you put together with 4 different stories in different genres. I got the book. I just finished it. Phenomenal. All 4 stories were great.
Thank you.
And I think you just announced that there will be issues 2 of all of them. Is that correct?
Yeah. One of the fun things that we did, that my business partner David Baldy put together, was he sent surveys out to everybody. So, which of these 4 books would you like to continue? If we could continue all 4 of them, would you prefer that to continuing just one of them? All, really long, detailed survey. And what came out in the end, that what had the biggest response was continue all 4. So that's what we're doing. We're, right now I've already started. I just finished the plot for the 2nd issue of Any Man this week. I'm going to jump into the script for Godsend in about 2 weeks after I write the next issue of Magneto. So it's great. And then what we'll do is, once we've got the work, really deep in process, we'll do another Kickstarter so that we can get volume 2 out there. So, the downside is it's going to take a while between chapters. The fun is I get to write all 4 of those stories again, which is really exciting. It was I couldn't have done it without David, he's the one who put this whole Spellbound Comics imprint together. Because I think if I would have done it by myself, I would have had a mental breakdown. It's a lot of work running a Kickstarter. Forget the creative work. Just that month of doing the Kickstarter is it's a lot. I was fried by the time that month was over, but it's also really fun and exciting and interesting. And luckily it was also successful. And I got to work with all these great artists and like you said, each story is really different, a different tone, a different mood, a different genre. And getting to continue all 4 of them is really, I'm really delighted.
I was one of the voters for all 4.
God bless
all
you.
of the above. Let's go with that. I was wondering, back to the sort of genesis of the project. Did you, when you were thinking about this, and obviously you have a lot of stories in your head about maybe they're somewhere along the lines of development, did you always think that you wanted to do it in this way? In other words, have these kind of very separate stories come out all at once, or was there any thought
it just
to
sort
doing
of
one at a time?
Yeah, that's the original thing was that, I spoke to David and David took a workshop of mine a few years ago. David has a long track record in Hollywood as a writer and a producer. And he took my workshop during COVID. And we became friends, and we started. And I thought about doing a Kickstarter for quite some time. And going back to what I said before, it's like I can't do this by myself. I just don't have the nervous system for it. And in conversation, David said, "Oh, maybe we could do something like that together." And so, what ideas do you have? So, you talk to any writer, and there's so many different stories that you've developed, you put aside, you wrote an outline, you pitched it, it didn't sell, you put it away for a while. Some of the books of mine that have, come out, have taken 10, 15, 20 years before that original idea turned into a printed book or a novella or whatever the heck it is, So I started pitching David different things, these four ideas. And he went, "Hey, why don't we do all four of them?" It was David's idea. Let's do 4 number ones. And I thought, that is really great. That is a really great idea. I remember years ago, Barry Smith did a thing for Dark Horse. It didn't last very long. It was called Barry Smith's Storyteller, I think it was called. It's a big, like Treasury edition size, beautiful Barry Smith artwork. And I think he had 3 different features in each issue. So you got 3 different stories. And it's, in a way, it reminds me of, the old Marvels in the 60s, Tales of Suspense and Tales of Astonish, where you got, Doctor Strange and Nick Fury, or the Hulk and the Submariner. You were picking up a book, but you weren't just reading one story. You're going to different worlds with it, And so the opportunity to do all 4 of these, and these are all stories that in one way, shape, or form, I've been nursing for a long time, So, and now, instead of having to try to get this one out of them, we're getting all 4 of them out at the same time. And we threw in a 5th bonus book at the end with the Edward Bloom mysteries. So it was just great to get all these ideas out simultaneously and work with 5 different amazing artists. It really, I have to say, one of the highlights of my entire career so far. Really, it was just a great experience.
It shows the sort of fun you had writing it, and that the artists did collaborating on the stories. I think really shows on the pages. So kudos for that. Is there anything you can tell us without spoiling entire stories that we can look forward to in these second issues or the second Kickstarter?
Nothing. I'm not going to get anything specific, but the biggest frustration for me doing the number ones of all 4 was I know where the stories are going, right? So let's take Godsend, for instance, which is sort of a Philip K. Dick meets Jack Kirby meets the Matrix thing. In the first issue, we're just concentrating on a small group of characters and just introducing the concepts, hopefully in an engaging way. But I know that by the time we're done, we will have a universe of characters here. It's a big, giant cosmic story, So it's going to grow, and it's going to grow, and it's going to grow as we go along. And it's the same with all of them. Layla, we've stepped into the Afterlands, but there's so many other places to explore. And it's the same with all of them. Wisdom, we just sort of like, okay, here are our characters, here's our world, here's the premise, but just wait till you see what's coming. So in my mind, the whole time, I'm like, I know what's coming, I know it's coming, and I can't tell them yet, So there will be. All I can say is that if the stories, however good they are, start here, they just broaden out and broaden out and broaden out as we go along.
Makes sense. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks.
So as the DeMultiverse sort of proves, is that you really are kind of a master of all genres and different formats. But do you ever, when you're writing or you're concepting, again, if that's the word, find yourself kind of stuck in one phase or the other? In other words, you're really riffing on sci-fi and you kind of want to stay there, or you're really into superheroes and you want to stay there, but then you get pulled in different directions? Or is it really you're just, everything's kind of a stew pot and whatever comes out next?
It's more like that. It's like, I always say story is story is story. Whatever genre you're working in, whether it's a comic book or a piece of prose or a film or a TV script, each of them has specific needs in terms of the way that story is expressed in that medium. But a good story is a good story is a good story. And the other thing is, and I started doing it early in my career unconsciously and then more consciously, is that I've always worked, even just within comics, across genres. I've done straight superhero stuff, funny superhero stuff with Keith. I've done all my creator-owned stuff. I've done kid-friendly stuff. I've done autobiographical things like Brooklyn Dreams. I'm always looking for something just to keep me interested. I've been doing this a long time, and I got to keep myself interested. Same thing. Oh, I'm gonna write a prose piece now. Oh, I'm gonna write an animated movie or a TV show or whatever it is. keeps me engaged. It keeps me interested. And then when you return to the other thing, you return with fresh eyes. I think if all I'd done all these years was just work in the superhero box, I think I would have burned out a long time ago. But the fact that I can bounce around even within comics to different genres has kept me engaged and interested.
Do you ever see a future where you're not working on comics, that you're working on just animation and novels, or is it just part of your DNA that comics is always going to be part of the mix?
Yeah, I could, there are times, I could look back 30 years and then I would say like, I think in a year's time, I won't be working in comics anymore, and then here I am, for me, it's just wherever things lead. When you're a freelancer, sometimes there's not a lot of choice in what you're doing. You go where the work leads you. And I've had periods where comics have been real, real busy. And then comics sort of die out from under me. And luckily the animation work has popped up, or I get a chance to write a book or whatever the thing may be. So, part of it is that thing that we we're just talking about, that I'm always looking for something different. And part of it is sometimes you just go where the work is. I've had periods where like I'm doing a lot of TV or animation work and there's like no comics. And then all of a sudden the comics get busy again. And after doing it for all these years, to this day, I don't understand why or how it works. Why is there like, oh God, I have too much work on Monday. I can't handle this. There's no work on Tuesday. Wednesday, you're working on something else. Thursday, there's no work. And it feels like you're at the whim of the universe, as you're getting knocked around like a little ping pong ball. But luckily, I always seem to find the next thing to do and it all works out. And again, it keeps me fresh and it keeps me interested. But, being a freelancer, you really need a specific kind of nervous system to live as a freelancer. And to do it for 40 years, you really need a specific kind of nervous system because, there are times where it's really, really difficult. And there are times where it's like the greatest thing in the world. But when I look back and I balance it all out over the course of an entire career, it's been great. I wouldn't even trade the bad times. They weren't fun, but I wouldn't trade them because it's all part of the same tapestry,
It sounds like you've kind of found your flow or made peace with the way things flow.
Yes.
In a
and I think you have
life.
to understand that if you're going into life as a freelancer. If you're going into it and then the first time things go wrong, you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. You're not going to make it. I always say, as a writer, it's like, sometimes things go really, really bad and the story gets turned down. There's no work. There's no this, there's no that, So I was, go crawl under your desk, bang your head against the wall, shake your fist at God, curse the gods, then get off your ass and sit down and write something else. And if you can't do that, then get a different job. You can still create on the side or whatever. But if you're going to do this full time and expect to like support yourself and your family doing it, you need a hard head, you need a thick skin, you need a finely tuned nervous system, that can handle this stuff. But, like I said, sometimes it's not easy, but the rewards are great. And I feel like I've been very lucky in that, even with, the ups and downs along the way, the overall arc has been a very positive one,
That's good to hear. So you have already talked about, and we've already discussed, how large a bibliography you have, how you've been doing this for decades. I'm curious if there's anything in your back catalog that doesn't get the attention you think it deserves. Like you haven't been asked about it on our podcast or any other, something underrated that people can go back and you feel like really deserves more accolades than.
That's a really interesting question. Because sometimes, you work on something and it's like, favorite thing you've ever done, and it goes out as and then you write something else and the whole world loves it, and you did the same thing. It's sort of like the ping pong ball of the universe. You never know. Certainly a lot of my creator-owned stuff, because the stuff that's going to get the overwhelming attention for the most part. Like if I go to conventions, it's like 1/3 Craven / Spider-Man, 1/3 JLI / everything I've done with Giffen, and 1/3 of everything else. Well, there's a lot of great stuff in that everything else, whether it's, creator-owned things like Moonshadow, or even Giffen and I, we did a creator-owned thing called Hero Squared years ago. One of my favorite things that we've ever done. Most people don't know that it exists. There's a lot of stuff like that that's just, you have to really kind of dig deep to find it. But a lot of those things are my favorite things. Brooklyn Dreams, my autobiographical graphic novel that I did, which we should have a new edition of coming out next year, which I'm very excited about. probably my favorite thing that I've ever done. I think there's lots of people that follow my work and love my work that don't even know it exists. I also see, because I've done such a broad swath of things, I go to conventions and there are people that are just into the creator-owned stuff. They'll come up with Moonshadow and Brooklyn Dreams and Seekers into the Mystery and all that kind of stuff. And then there's, of course, the other people that just know the superhero stuff, where they might just be fans of my work with Giffen. There's all these different slices of the pie. And it's interesting that someone could be into my work and not know about this other thing over here that I think is the best thing I've ever done. But I always say, you release the stories into the wild and they're not yours anymore. There's a relationship, not between the audience and me, but between the audience and the story. You know what I mean? Yep. And so they decide what it is they love. And then there's the flip side of, like, you do something that goes out, nobody notices. And, like, you notice 10 years later, all these people coming up with that book at a convention, and they really love that. And everybody hated it when it came out. And now there's a whole other generation of people that have found it, or maybe they found it then and they were the quiet ones and they weren't, you know what I mean? And now they're older and they can say, oh, this book touched me, it changed my life, and that's the greatest thing. That's the best thing about what we do, aside from just the sheer creative joy of creating, is when I hear from someone that's read one of my stories, and I get a lot of really sincere, good people that I see at conventions, or that write to me or whatever, and they say, this made a difference in my life. This touched my heart. I read this at a time in my life where it was really difficult, and the themes of this story and the way you presented it, opened a new door for me, or whatever it is. One person saying that to you is worth an entire career, let alone the multiple people over the years that have said that. It's a great thing.
Are there particular projects that pull at the heartstrings, or that you get those personal accolades for? Or is it kind of different things for different?
It's different things, because sometimes, I read Moonshadow, I read Brooklyn Dreams. It's these things that are deep and deeply personal to me. But someone might come up with an issue of Justice League International, which is just a goofy, funny story. But that goofy, funny story really, really lifted them up at a time when they needed it. Right. So you never know. And that's one of the reasons why I try not to ever knock anything of mine in public. Like, I have stories of mine that I'll look at them and I go, that was a disaster. That just didn't work. I screwed it up. It just didn't, because I could be sitting in a convention and someone comes up to me with that very book and says, this is my favorite comic book that I've ever read. So you don't want to be like, imagine, this is your favorite comic, then you see the guy that wrote it going, this is an absolute piece of shit. Can't believe anybody ever liked it, So I try not to ever do anything like that. It reminds me, I'm a big Beatles fan, and John Lennon was very big on knocking his own work. He would knock, Paul's songs, but he was the hardest on his own work. And he'd say, oh, that was a piece of crap. Oh, that was terrible. And these are like great songs, but you see, it affects public perception. Well, if the guy who wrote the song said it's not a good song, I guess I'm wrong. Maybe it's not a good song, and it's sort of an insult to the readership to knock the work that way, I think. Yeah. Let them enjoy the stories that they want to enjoy, and I'll have the ones that I love and hate, and I'll keep that private. I'll talk about the ones I really love in public, but I'm not going to get into the ones that I don't like.
Well, I'm sure even the ones you maybe didn't like, you put an awful lot of effort into.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
What I've learned over the years also is to respect the writer I was at the time that I wrote that story, because I know I was working it as hard as I could, right, and doing the very, very, and sometimes you do the very best you can, and it just doesn't work. It's just, that's creativity. That's the creative life. I've said over the years, writer-artist chemistry is a very specific thing. Writers and artists have chemistry together the way that, you meet people at a party and you have instant chemistry together. And I've seen stories where I did a really good job. The artist did a really good job. They're a really talented artist. We put it together and something just didn't click and the story didn't work. Everybody did the very best they could, but it didn't work. You can't control that any more than I can control your response to a story when you read it.
Right.
All I can do is the best that I can do. And after that, it's in the God's hands, Yeah.
One book that I wanted to bring up on a personal level that I just loved of yours, and where I think you clicked with the artist very well, was your Spectacular Spider-Man run with Sal Buscema.
Yes.
Which I thought lived up to the adjective before Spider-Man, which I thought was spectacular.
When you talk about chemistry, what I remember getting the pencils for the first issue. We did it plot first. So I would write a very detailed plot. Sal would draw it. I'd get it back, and I'd put in the final captions and dialogue. And first of all, Sal just sparked to it. I'd worked with Sal on some fill-ins over the years, but we never really had a chance to collaborate. And on the fill-ins, he was just doing breakdowns, and other people were doing finishes and stuff. But this was like magic from the first page, first panel. And again, you can't control it. It just happened. And I would look at his artwork, and it was just so easy to script from that. And he would bring the essence of my plot out, and just the chemistry. It was just such a great collaboration. And one of my great frustrations is that this stuff still has, been a story here, a story there, but they have not done a proper collection. They just put out a giant omnibus in Spain. People were tweeting about it the other day, all these Spanish fans. And they put out an omnibus in Poland, and I've seen it in other countries. Why haven't they done it here? I don't understand.
I don't understand either. But I have a weird theory. Well, maybe not a theory, but I think I collected that when I was growing up, like right when I was in the pocket in terms of comic book reading and collecting. And I wonder if you felt this when it was coming out, which was that it was the early 90s, and Amazing Spider-Man, the sister title, if you will, was gaining a lot of attention from Farland, from Eric Larson, from those, sort of those that went on to Found Image. And of course, it was a big visual time period. That Spectacular Spider-Man was more of, I loved it, and I think a lot of people did, but sort of was living a little bit in the shadow of that, and didn't get sort of the respect and accolades that it deserved. Did you feel that when it was coming out?
No, actually, I didn't, because what I remember was that the response to the book was always very positive, not just in the readership, but at the Marvel office. People really were behind the book, and really appreciated what we were doing. But even if that's the case, they collect everything. I've had the same thing. I've had things in my collective where like, you really don't need to collect that. You can leave that one alone, but they collected it. And so that's why I don't understand. It's Spider-Man. It's a story that, if anything, over the years, its reputation has grown, that run, and like I said, they're reprinting it all over the world. So what's going on? I don't know. I'm just like everybody else. The solicits come out every month. I don't know what's coming out. So I go looking, maybe this month. No, it's not there yet. And it's been 30 years, whatever it is. It's about time, I think.
All right. It's time for a letter writing campaign. We'll start it here, because that does need to be collected. It is truly spectacular. I wanted to give you the chance also, kind of the opposite side of the coin of the couple questions ago, which is, I'm sure that you have stories in your head, personal stories that you have not written yet, but given the vastness of, your sort of writing diversity over the big two and even beyond, are there any characters that you feel like you have not gotten the chance to write properly, or you've not gotten a chance to write at all?
What I always think about when people ask me that question is Fantastic Four. I may have written some of the individual characters, and I always thought that me and Giffen and Maguire on a Fantastic Four miniseries, I don't want to take a job away from anybody else. Whoever's writing the regular book, it's fine. If we could go off and do a miniseries, the three of us together, that would be heaven. Because those classic Lee Kirby Fantastic Fours are still some of the best comic books ever made, and those characters are so classic. And it's a great combination of character work with big cosmic concepts and just a sense of fun. And I would love to do something with that. And it's true, between especially with DC, between the comics and all the animation work I've done, there's hardly a character I haven't written. And I guess there must be some at Marvel. Well, look, here's Magneto. And that's one I wouldn't have even thought about until they came to me. And it's like, oh yeah, this is great. So you never know. That's the other thing I've learned over the years is sometimes, like I've seen it with some of these animated things, when they've come to me and they said, well, here's what we'd like you to do next. And my first response is, oh, that character? Well, I was thinking we'd do another Batman movie or whatever the thing may be. Yeah. And then you start to dig in and really immerse yourself in that character, and you get to fall in love with a character in a way you never did before. And there's a real big difference between the way you perceive a character, say, as a reader and as a writer. You have different chemistry with the characters as a writer than you do as a reader. And certain characters maybe you loved as a reader, you may still love as a reader, but you don't necessarily connect with them in the same way as a writer. Or something as silly as, well, not silly, but when I was writing Spider-Man, I fell in love with Aunt May's character. I just thought Aunt May was so much. Once I started writing her, I used to, this annoying old woman, and I started writing her, and I found so many levels and layers of depth and complexity and interest in her that she was one of my favorite things about writing Spider-Man, was writing Aunt May. So of course I killed her. But so you never know. You never know how it's going to be in terms of your relationship to a character. And I think I may have gone far afield of your question, but this is where we ended up.
That's okay. It actually sparks one other question before we start to close it out, which is, are there any characters that you can think of, and again, without denigrating the characters at all, but that DC or Marvel or whomever could come to you with, that you just think, that's not, I can't do that? Or are all of them basically, you can find that nugget and, exploit the sort of drama from it?
Right. I think it's the latter, because like I said, sometimes my reaction is, I don't like that character. But then you start to think about it. If you start to think about it and you start digging and you can't find the nugget, then do not do it, But like the first thing that will come to mind would be the Punisher, not a character that I ever had any affinity for. But I remember back in the 90s, someone came to me and said, "Would you be interested in doing a Punisher story?" And my first reaction was no. And then I thought about it, and I came up with a story that I actually kind of liked, that explored the character in what I thought was a new way. And of course, it never happened. And I actually took that idea and turned it into a Batman graphic novel. So it all works out in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are certain, like, I'm not a big fan of super assassin type characters. Like, I'm tough and I kill a lot of people. Those aren't the characters that I resonate with. But I did a Deathstroke movie for DC. Deathstroke is a super assassin.
Yeah.
And once I did my research and dug in and saw what they had built into that character, I found things that I could connect with and relate to. Would never be my first choice, but I found it, and I had a really good time working on that and learned to enjoy the character and his world as I wrote it.
Looking at your back catalog, one thing that stuck out, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm interested to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that via what we've been talking about, is a Scooby Apocalypse.
Right. It's a perfect example. Well, and there's two sides to that. One is, like I said, I've done a lot of animation, and I got a call one day about working on this Scooby-Doo show. It was called Be Cool Scooby-Doo. It was on about, 5 or 6 years ago.
I actually remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is not in my wheelhouse. You know what I mean? But it's like, A, it's a gig, and B, I'm going to learn something, because it was like working in a style and a genre, and Scooby-Doo stories, like the cartoons, have very specific needs. There's a mystery, there's a character arc, there's a this, there's that. So to think that one of the most challenging things I've ever done was Be Cool Scooby-Doo is a funny thing to say, but it was very challenging. And so you learn to exercise new muscles, I talk about the fact that, team groups, big teams of characters where you have to juggle all this stuff, can be very intimidating for me. And I remember when I was working on Justice League Unlimited, and the second episode they gave me had like almost every character that had ever been in the Justice League in it. And I had to figure out a way, I'd avoided it for all those years, but here it is. It's a giant story with tons of characters, and you build those muscles doing it, So what was the original question? Did I just lose?
We're talking about Scooby Apocalypse, and
right. Yeah. So like Scooby Apocalypse, same thing.
Characters that,
Who in a million years I'd never say, "Oh, wow, Scooby Apocalypse! What a great gig that'll be." So Keith calls me up one day and says, "Talking to Jim Lee, and he wants us. They're doing these Hanna-Barbera books, and they want us to do Scooby-Doo." And I've always said, when it comes to working with Keith, I don't really care what the project is. If it's Millie the model, I'm in, because I love working with Keith, and we have built up such a chemistry over the years and such a wonderful collaboration. And so Scooby Apocalypse ends up turning into this fantastic gig. And I fall in love with these characters, and we have a great time, and we did it for 3 years, and I loved it. So I always tell my students, you always have to be open to whatever surprises the universe is bringing you, especially as a freelancer, if you hope to survive anyway. you have to say yes. I mean, if they say we'd like to do a Hitler miniseries and we want him to be the hero of the miniseries, you can say no, but that's not going to come up very often or at all, you know?
I hope not.
Be open to, you know, even animation. I just stumbled into that backwards. I never had a plan to have a career in animation. I dabbled in it a little bit in the 80s. And then I'd worked with Stan Berkowitz. He was the producer of the live action Superboy show back in the, was it 90s? And I wrote like 5 episodes for that and worked on staff for a while. And Stan and I got to know each other. And then he ended up working in animation and called me up one day and said, "Oh, you want to do an episode of Justice League?" And it wasn't like, "Oh, I can't wait to work in animation." Oh, no. It was like, "Oh, it's a gig and it's working with Stan and it should be interesting and fun." And I fell in love with it. That wasn't on my bucket list. It wasn't, I must do this, but I said yes. And that ended up turning into a 20+ career in animation and a career that I have really, really loved. So, you know, saying, don't get intimidated. Don't run away if it doesn't feel like it's in your wheelhouse. Use it as an opportunity to learn and grow and build some new muscles. And it may lead to a whole career path that you never knew was there.
That's great advice. Yeah. I think even beyond the creative arts, I think, saying yes is an important part of anybody's learning and development.
Absolutely.
No matter what career you're in. So
yeah. And you know, to be open to other voices, to be open to criticism. You know, I've worked with a lot of young writers over the years. When I say young, I don't necessarily mean young chronologically, but young in terms of their experience. Right. And you know, the people that really are gonna do well are the people that when you say this is what you need to know, this is what's wrong here, this is what needs to be fixed, and they're open. And that's the way I was at the beginning. Tell me, I want to learn. Oh, you want me to change that? You want everybody in the story to have green hair? Fine, I'll do it because I want to learn. And then I've encountered, and happily not a lot, the people that really all they want to do, they want your approval for what they've already done. You know, and if you say, I think this needs to be changed, they'll take 20 minutes to justify why it shouldn't be changed. To which I say to them, why did you ask me in the first place? You know, if you're already locked in. But that's pretty rare. I think most people who are creative are open, you know, and still after doing this for all these years, I still have to be open to other voices and feedback and you know, because there's a part of me that's like, hey, I've been doing this for 40 years. I know more than all of you. And there's the other part of me that knows that, you know, that editor could be 25 years old and in the business for 10 minutes and still have the most valuable advice I've ever run across. So I have to find a balance between both those things. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Be open, everybody.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to leave it. But before we go, can you talk about any upcoming projects? I remember our last episode, which I recently re-listened to, said I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that. Is there anything coming up?
Okay, so well, obviously Magneto is out now. Yep. I'm working on chapter 2 of all the DeMultiverse books. I have another Spider-Man related miniseries that I can't talk about that I'm going to start working on in the fall for Marvel. I had about a year ago, I had a novella for a company called Neotex that came out called The Excavator, which you can find on Amazon. Please go check it out. I have another novella for them that should be out, I hope, in the fall, called The Witness. Very excited. And I'm about to sign a contract for a third novella for them. So that's been a lot of fun. And I think that's it for now, but that's a lot, you know, that's like,
plenty.
It's like, you know, a lot of different comic book projects and prose. And I'm sure there's things I'm forgetting as well. So right now I'm really, really busy. I'm like book solid for the rest of the year.
Welcome back, everybody. What'd you think of that interview? I find JM to be a very fascinating guy. He really has an interesting perspective on the process, can really kind of write any character, gets into their headspace, really kind of exploits their strengths and weaknesses. And I just love how he looks at these stories from the past. So that was a great one. I'm glad he was here to join us. I wanted to say before we leave that we do have a subscription service. Please support us. So you can go to $bandits.buzzsprout.com. Look for that little support button. Throw us a few bucks. It really helps us with getting this program going and continuing and getting the guests that we get. So please remember to subscribe. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on YouTube, on any podcast platform of your choice, particularly Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you next time.